Okay. And I think just if someone tells me if the screen is visible.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, just for the time, we will be, so normally we will should finish 1:15. We will have about 1:40 for the ending of this lesson. Sorry for the late, but we started late. So, archaeology of the materiality. I introduced this theme, bringing together the archaeology of the materiality with the public and the community archaeology and the role that heritage have in both in studying the past and in presenting it, because it's very strong pillar of modern archaeology. We can say that it is the most fashionable one nowadays, and it is so deeply connected with the digital aspect. When we want to study heritage between ethics, politics, and the social system, we are doing it by presenting it, popularizing it by mostly through narrative that are digital, or they use a lot of digital tools. We do that, but what we do is telling, narrating, engaging with piece of objects, materials that came to us from the past. And we have to say that material culture is something that is active, or better, that is and was active beyond its functionality. Material culture is not only an object that we can present, describe, make a 3D, narrate, but is something that had an agency on the past. The modern understanding of the potential of the materiality, it diverged significantly from the conventional studies of materiality and archaeology. So normally, or conventionally, as you want to say, and mostly it happened on the Western archaeology and the European one. The archaeology made a lot of analysis about the materials, the manufacturers, the fabrics, or whatever around the object that we are studying. But in a public and in a community archaeology perspective, we should move on towards a system that tackles the connection, the connotation around and beyond the objects. So we have to go through a very unstable terrain of interrelationship that is between the social, the temporal, the spatial, and the material aspects that are around that very object. It is, it is written, a very unstable terrain. It's something that is not defined, but in somehow it is the most compelling terrain where we can tell something relevant that go beyond the object itself, go beyond history, and can tell about the past, something that is much more deeply new, that is very of interest, not only for us, but also for the public. So there is quite a lot of theoretical notion when we study the materiality of the past. Here I put the very basic one, and most of them I'm sure that you have already studied in these years of your archaeological career. So we have the concept of the material habitus. So this idea that it doesn't exist an object outside a very combined set of action of a group of individuals, so more than once normally, that through their invention, their opinions, their religious belief, their way of use the space and the object, they give a specific habitus, they give a specific life word that is the framework in which we have to try to interpret and reenact the object that the archaeological certification brought to us. So archaeological objects are things, as post-processual theorists say. They are things that have strong relationship with humans. But there is not only a relationship. The simple relationship, for example, there is a lot of stones on that area, so that specific community could open some quarries and build their houses by stone. This is a simple relationship. And a reverse relationship in a similar way is that a village nearby a sea in area where there is not stone, but a lot of forest, they would have used wood for making houses and infrastructure and so on. There is more than that, because things, object, they have a co-presence, a commingling, so they build a very specific material human world connected together that is much more than a simple relation. So Thies introduced the concept of entanglement very nicely and widely studied by Ian Older. Every time that I want to have a short idea, a very snapshot view, what is entanglement, I think about the example that Ian Oder makes about the wall. Probably many of you knows that. He says, for example, that if there was a man in the past that built a wall for some reason, maybe because he was upset with his neighbor, and he wanted to have a wall, a fencing wall, dividing his property with the nearby one, that wall is not only an object that has to be studied about around the fact, the question, what is the material that he used, which is the construction techniques, what is the beam there, and whatever. But we can move on, and we can see that the wall have an agency on that community. Because, for example, after a few years, it is possible that the son or the grandson of the man that built the wall is nearby, is living nearby, and he have to cope with the fact that the wall is collapsing because it's a material artifacts that have its own life, and its own life is decaying life, is the fact that the binder is moving out, that is collapsing, that the stone are not so fixed as they were when the wall was built. So the grandson have to take a decision. Maybe he completely he lives in a completely changed environment, and so the need of that wall is not anymore there, but he have to make some very costly in terms of time and money decision about what to do with the wall. You have to rebuild it or you have to torn it down. Whatever it does, the actions and the activity that we can trace about him are dictated much more from the wall than from the other, from the physicity of the wall than from the other aspects. So material culture is active beyond its functionality. So all the actions reproduce a multitude of structures that perpetuate social relationship and cultural values. For archaeologists, so it means that we need to try to define what is the specific perception and beliefs that people have towards that piece of material in that condition and that time. So it is a very entangled story that have a lot of aspects, and not all of that are visible in the archaeological record. Having said that, and having asked before if digital archaeology is a tool or discipline, we can ask another question. The digital archaeological data, for example, a digital photo of an artifact or a database with a lot of entries about the artifacts, or a PowerPoint presentation, whatever, is a thing that can have an agency on us as archaeologists. So it is possible that some digital manufactured object that we use a lot have an agency, exactly the agency that they have the material objects. So it is a big question, and probably is a question that is not fully answered by the current archaeological practice. I want to show you some very few practical example that comes from my my experience to see how the interrelationship in between the object and the social and the social meaning and the social history of the object and the social narration history of the object can have. I will start with an object that we will use also in the lab this afternoon and in the next days. This chair is a throne, is a stone throne that comes from Venice, Torcello Island. It is a northern smaller, northern island, sorry, an island in Northern Lagoon, a very small island, but is very well known in the area because in Torcello we have the most antique religious building that in somehow it is recorded are the first religious building of the area, and so Torcello in somehow is the place where Venice originated, where everything started. This chair is called locally as Attila thrones, so the thrones of the king of the Huns. Why? Narratives, chronicle narratives dated from the 11th centuries onward, they are saying that Venice started because some Roman peoples prefer to escape the invasion of the Huns, the barbarians, and they didn't want to be captivated by them. They didn't want to leave their late Roman laws and culture, and so they preferred to escape in the islands, in the Venice Islands, and even if there was a very bad environment, so the story tells, the story tells so, the narrative tell that was a very inhospitable, a very hard environment, marshy, with very few land, a lot of salty water. They preferred to go there. And so they flew from Attila and they went to Torcello. So what about to have Attila thrones where they are living, where they are moving? There are a lot of legends about that. They say that this was the throne that Attila wanted to have there for judging some military question, or was a stolen throne that the Venetian got from him, and so on. Archaeologically, this is a late medieval, probably 13th century chair. It was originally placed inside the church, and it was the bishop's seats. On the engraving here, we have the Torcello emblem. It was inside the church, so it was something that is not related at all with the Attila. But in the 19th century, when the church has been restored, they moved it out because in the 19th century they removed everything that was not Byzantine, because the decoration, the main decoration of the church is 11th century Byzantine mosaics, very beautiful. Next time we will be in Venice, we will visit for sure. So they moved out everything that was not so narrating this Byzantine iconic history. And it was moved out under the porch and then moved in the courtyard in front of the church. There, the local narrative and local tradition start to call it Trono di Attila, Attila Thrones. So we don't know exactly when it starts, but the fact that is the Attila thrones is absolutely something much more important than the materiality and then the origin of the seat itself. It is a tradition for every visitors that go to the island to take a picture of himself sitting over it. I think all the Venetians that are here or nearby have that very picture when they were a child or whatever. Even if this practice is damaging a lot the the object, no one is saying nothing, because in somehow it is part of the myth of the origin of Venice to having this very chair and having this opportunity to sit over the Attila thrones. And so it's not any more important whatever the chair is and whatever the history starts and it is true or not. The chair is the Attila throne and is narrating a very specific history that archaeology is proving wrong at all. The Venetian didn't go in the islands because the Huns or the Lombards, but there is absolutely different history. But what we have to do with this, we have to remove this social complexity that is encrusted on the object, or we have to work with it. Because the fact that Attila throne is there, it really shaped the way that many archaeologists narrated what they found in Torcello and what they found in the nearby Roman city. So every time a burnt layer has been found, it has been said that these were the traces of the Attila destruction or the Huns destruction, and every time they found a pole, a wooden pole or wooden huts in Torcello, 19th and early 20th century archaeology, they were saying, oh, these are the very tiny huts that the first Venetian built in the island for rescuing themselves from Attila. So all the narratives around Venice are in somehow depending of this very object. Most of them are wrong or partially wrong, but in somehow the unicity and the importance of the whole island as an archaeological park, as an archaeological element, it passed through the fact that is the Attila throne. So how to deal with it? I'll pass to another example. I think many of you know what these statues are. These are the Tetrarchs statues on the southwestern corner in San Marco Church in Venice. And this is taken in a particular moment of high tide. It seems that the kings, the emperors in that case, are frightened by the high tides. So I use this picture as we are in the world. High tide is submerging Venice, no? I use this picture for introducing another way to use this entanglement in between archaeological narrative and social perspective. So who's afraid of high tides? Water have a very specific narratives in Venice. So we can ask, is Venice sinking? Yes, it is. It is a matter of fact. Eustatism and the rising level of ocean and Mediterranean Sea and Adriatic in specific is giving to Venice a very risk in being sinking. But if we use archaeology, we could use the archaeological record to save Venice or to better understand why this sinking process is so strong. Maybe, in fact, we failed to raise the city up. This is the representation of how the high tide, last very high tides in 2019, November last year, affected the cities. We have the highest tide ever recorded in recent history. And you can see that in the very center of the city, Rialto Bridge area or San Marco Square, water was very high. But in a new place, so where the train station is in Venice, it is not new, it is a newly built area, the high tide didn't affect it. Why? Because that area has been renewed a lot in the late 18th, early 20th centuries, and so there the aspect of preserving archaeology, preserving heritage, preserving the materiality of the past as it was not a problem, because the nation at that time, they needed so much a train station, and so they built everything at the proper level, adjusted to the high tides of the late 19th or early 20th centuries. So in somehow we can say that Yes, it's true. Venice is sinking, but is sinking more because through the archaeological perspective and the archaeological and historical history of architecture perspective, we put Venice itself in a showcase, in a display case, and we want to preserve it as it was. We don't want move any stones. We want it as an archaeological park because we are paid as archaeologists, as heritage people, to preserve it. And so we do a lot of 3D, we do a lot of digitization, we do a lot of measurement, and doing that, we stress more and more the original characters of the Venice as it was, and even every time owners of a house, of a palace, would like to have some modification to contrast the rising tide levels, he cannot, because we decide that Venice needs to be preserved like it is. In that way, using an archaeological approach and preservation approach, we are going completely against what was the way that Venetian coped with high tides in the past. They, in fact, raise up the city all the time. These are a set of archaeological layers from Torcello Island again, where you can see a different layer from medieval houses, and in these 20 sequence of different houses, you have only 200 years. So every 15, 20 years, not more, they needed to raise up to destroy and rebuild the house. So Venice worked like that in the past. Worked like that in the past, and now it works in a very different way. It works through the narrative that we are giving as archaeologists, as heritage people, as UNESCO. We are giving a new ontology. Venice now is something that needs to be saved. Save Venice, protect Venice. And so Venice, in our mind, is much more likely it is a very pale young woman that is dying from its environment. So archaeology could help to understand how Venice worked in the past, but also can be a very harmful approach because through archaeology and through history of art and to conservation practice, we in somehow, let pass the term, condemn Venice to not be renewed and so to be synced. There is many way to declinate the same concept. If we think again in Venice, it is a watery cityscape, and here, for example, you have a sketch, an archaeological sketch based on the Torcello excavation, and so we know that the very first Venetian settlement were organized like that, with detached island without any bridges, with a lot of water in between. So you had to move over the water for going from the houses, for example, here to get the church and so on. We have this very specific topography, ancient topography, that is completely different from the today one, because today we have a lot of bridges, we walk over Venice, so basically we stay dry when we visit Venice about the day, but the day that there is high tide. Venice was a watery cityscape, and we don't consider that the water was everywhere, so also under the ground. What you see here is the number, more than 6,000 cistern, water cistern decorated with a well, the famous well cisterns in Venice, that completely cover all the city. So basically, Venice was not an area of soil. There was water everywhere, channels, small channels, lagoon, and there was water also under the floor because the water around was salty, and they need to build these very big cisterns. You have here a reconstruction of them in the central part of the cities where they had fresh water to live. So water was the elements, was the material. What we do as archaeologists when we excavate Venice, we excavate everything but water. And we do our reconstruction and our narrative about Venice, often putting water in our perspective, in the perspective that people that visit Venice without being in the water, but only walking over the level, over claimed area, and with people that doesn't know how to use a boat, with this perspective that is completely unrelated to the waterscape that they had before. I take just 2 minutes for giving you another hint about this interrelationship in between the materiality of the objects and its narrative and this perspective on the narratives. That is the one that brings us to politics. We have already saw in the Throne of Attila that the use of Attila in the past, about the early Middle Age chronicles, was a little bit political, because in fact, the fact that the Venetian, they built for themselves a myth, a fake history, saying that they were escaped from a very honorable and strong king that wanted to destroy them, but they won and they escaped, so they avoided to be destroyed, is a very strong political point. If this point is made in the 11th century, when Venice want to put a long, as much or distance with the inner part of the Europe, with the Carolingian, the post-Carolingian world, when Venice doesn't want to be part of something that politically is not safe, also military is not safe, I want to build for itself an history that is much more connected with the East, with Constantinople, with the Mediterranean trade. So they use this idea of Attila devastation or Lombard devastation, that is pretty much the same, even if there is 3 centuries of difference in between them. They use these narratives for political reason. It was the safest and the best solution that they could, to say that they were not Carolingian, they were not linked with the barbarian, they were not linked with these savage people that devastated the empire at the end of its history. So when they create this history, if you Google the origin of Venice, you find all these funny words about Lombard, about barbarian destruction, escape, and so on. That all these words, that they are really shaping the way that we interpret material culture. If we find something that is Lombard in terms of material culture, we are asking, it is an importation or it is something locally produced. If we find something that is Oriental from Byzantium or from North Africa, we are saying, oh, this is the main cultural system of Venice and is opposing to the mainland and so on. But everything that we do, as Italian archaeologists, I'm seeing the point as an Italian archaeologist, a traditional archaeologist, we say that saying that the barbaric invasion was invasions, not migrations. I put here very recent pictures about new migration. If we swift between the terms, the words, between migrants or invasion, we are building a completely different narrative. So also a digital or a narrative tool that is labeled in some way, it is a very strong agency in the narrative, in the narration of the past that we are presenting to our public. Hayden-Wade said long years ago that there is a fiction of narrative, the fiction history, or archaeology also is a fiction. So basically he says that every community, every state manufacture a story that fits for it. And we as archaeologists, we are part of the process and we are not all the time aware of it. We are not the time aware of the social and political implication. We reinvent and we redraw meeting beginnings because it works with the political agenda. There are a lot of examples that goes from the Napoleonic destruction in Egypt to reinforce its imperial agenda that he had to, for example, Macedonia, that are using archaeological and material evidence from Alexander the Great to reinforce its origin. There is more and more subtle. If we look at his images, we are all agreeing that destruction like that ISIS did in the past years and were so well broadcasted by their propaganda in the West, this action should be condemned. But we are not completely aware why ISIS or other extremist religious group use the destruction activity to assess their political crazy, most of the time, agenda. What is, for example, Palmyra or another city destroyed by the ISIS? What it represents for an average local man that lives around? It represents an archaeological site that have been studied for long years by Western archaeologists. Archaeologists that they took the most valuable things for many here in Europe, and they create museum and narratives for the sake and the history of a Western thought. Mostly not recognizing, for example, the second uses, third uses that these cities had during Muslim and Islamic times, that they were very interesting and very compelling. But when we are visiting cities like that, we are not informed about it. So in somehow, what they were bombing is not a pre-Islamic something that have a religious meaning different the one that the extremist group want to set up in that area. Is also bombing the Western thought. Is also bombing a Western colonial way to do archaeology. And probably thousands of archaeologists that work in that mission here and that, without willing, they were participating in this colonial use of the land, and also in this commodification in somehow of a very specific heritage that has been spoiled, taken off from local communities. The case of that are many and a lot in our world. So who belong the past? Who does the past belong to? Should the British Museum give back the sculptures that it owns to Athens New Museum or not? There is a problem around the archaeology that being material, be something that you can take in your hands, is something that can be patrimonialized, can be an object of value, can be commodified, can be sold, can be purchased. So the word patrimonio, that is the Italian word for heritage, cultural heritage, really embodied these things, is something that has a object value. And so when we do narratives about these objects, when we do research about this object, we are participating in this commodification, in this process of heritization that is a very Western one. Even if UNESCO is advocating a global view, UNESCO concept is very Western. And the UNESCO concept is the one that also, UNESCO and ICOMOS that it goes with, is the one that is forcing in somehow us as archaeologists to overproduce digital narratives about the past, because we have to perpetuate that memory as much as we can. These are mandates that are written in binding documents that every single UNESCO signs when it is declared under the UNESCO system. There are completely different areas, geographical areas, that had a much more complex relationship with the materiality of the past. I put here only one taken from the North America, and citing the NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, that is this law of 1990 that allows native communities to reappropriate themselves of bones and skeletons of their ancestor digged out by archaeologists through time for archaeological and scientific reason. And so in that way, the communities want to have their ancestors back because they said in somehow that the archaeological research completely moved out that elements from their land, and without considering the fact that these objects are religiously and symbolically valuable in terms of materiality, as we said before about the wall, in terms that the Western archaeologists are not understanding. I close with that. So it is a very complex domain, how to narrate, how to use this past and how to present it in digital and in traditional way. It is true that there is something in Europe, moreover, that still we are not doing at the proper level. That is community archaeology. We are doing public archaeology. We are presenting quite a lot. But probably we didn't learn enough from the North American, or for example, the Australian example, the way to make relevant the archaeology that we did, that we do with the community that stays around the area that we are working. And in somehow we are reproducing this approach, this colonial approach, where we go there for our scientific reason, forgetting that the main task for an archaeology is the reconstruction of the past, not for its own sake, but or for its own ego, but for making this material relevant, for adding elements to a very complex history of the local communities and the local world. This is a photo about Torcello, the excavation that we would love to have you around if everything would have gone well without the COVID-19 and so on. And so we will have the opportunity to see in practice how some kind of activities could be. We will have these, we will have had also other activities around the River Brenta with Elisa and her beautiful project around the mainland just out Venice. We will do next time. For now, we will try to understand theoretically how it works. I'm handing here, sorry that I've been very long. I go back to you.
Thank you, Diego.
Sorry, 10 minutes more. Sorry.
Thank you. It's very interesting. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I don't know if we want to skip question or having question. What do you think, Elisa? Because we have another meeting in 1 hour, 10?
1 hour, yeah. It's a strong day today, but your intervention is very, very interesting. So I really like the idea of a connection. I really like the idea, the example of the wall and what Oder says in 2012 about it. And I love the idea of perception of the past and that change over the century, that is changing. I try to study it. So in my opinion, it's very difficult today to find a connection a relation is very difficult. A dialogue with also people living, for instance, in Torcello. I think it's very difficult to find a dialogue and create a new dialogue, especially when you have to change the story. So it's not simple to do. But from this perspective, I think that digital archaeology is a discipline. No, don't you think? That's and also,
because you need to think how it is ontologically built, because what you are putting in the arena is something that have the same role of the throne. I mean, if you are putting in YouTube a very nice video selling, saying T's and T's, you have to think the impact that it will have. Also on the materiality of the object.
Yeah, and in this case, I think also that heritage is in Venice is automatically should be tangible. In this case of Venice, or the example you will see in my presentation in the afternoon, heritage around Venice is completely intangible. It's more intangible than we think. So it's not so easy to do that. Do you think that our materiality or our mind have to change, or is the key, could be the key for the future?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, then I think when you say also our mind, it is true, because archaeology is one of these disciplines that has such a social value. So we are serving the community. Whatever you want to decline it, we are doing that. There is no reason to do archaeology if there is no social value beyond that. And the problem is that the academia, the way that we have to do our research, sometimes doesn't allow us to have room for experiment how to communicate with the communities, how to deal with this process that they took long times. And so we have to produce, to publish, to give out our data using our jargon, so that will be understood only from, I don't know, 2 or 3 friends of us, and that's it. So there is a huge problem on that, and unfortunately, the social distancing is not helping.
I completely agree with you. Okay, so I finish my question.
Okay.
Thank you again, Diego.
If there is other question, I'd be happy, but also I will be happy when we will start at 4:30 with the lab. Because of course, as you probably understood, this will very connected with the lab that we are going to try to do together. So guys, if it's okay like that, if there is no question, if I killed you, we can have our lunch break and be back at 3 p.m.
3 p.m. Yes.
Central Time. We have the Elisa very interesting lecture, and I know very well Elisa, and she will be on time, not like me. So we will have another little break before 4:30 lab. Okay?
Okay, see you here.
Any thought, guys? Just say yes to us to know that everything is okay. Okay. Thank you. So see you, same address, same Google Meet address, 3 p.m. Thank you. Bye, guys.